40 seriously strange details in the Twilight books that didn't make it to the movies. Love or hate them, you can't deny that the Twilight books were weird. But in the jump to the big screen they lost a lot, including character details, moments of good-bad romance, and a great deal of strange little things. These 40 things never made it into the films, and they're all the worse for it. Or, depending on your point of view, better. In the Twilight novel, Bella informs Edward at dinner that he dazzles people. And the latter then responds with the line, "Do I dazzle you?" Die-hard Twihards love that line. It's emblazoned across many a fan Photoshop edit of Edward and quite a few t-shirts as well. But it didn't actually make it into the movie. In the book universe of Twilight, Bella falls very fast for Edward, and it gets a little obsessive. At one point he even overhears her saying his name in her sleep. Edward informs her, in his typically unsettling way, "You're interesting when you sleep." And Bella reacts with heat flooding her face all the way to her hairline. The first Twilight book goes into more detail about Edward's brother vampire Jasper, who has the power to influence people's minds. Edward explains, he was quite charismatic in his first life, able to influence those around him to see things his way. Now he is able to manipulate the emotions of those around him, calm down a room of angry people, for example. But in the film adaptation, it doesn't come up. The vampire men of Twilight are supposed to be all over 6 feet tall. This doesn't really work movie-wise, as the actors probably weren't cast with height being the first thing in mind. So that one little bit of vampire family oddness was lost, and they're all pretty average in size. Turns out that in the book series, Bella is not a fan of blood. Indeed, she even faints at the sight of it when her biology class does blood typing. But all of that was left out of the movie. And in 2008 director Catherine Hardwicke told the Los Angeles Times that although she kind of liked the scene in the book, it was still removed for the sake of condensing things. In the original book, Bella comes across a website called Vampires A to Z when researching the kind of creature her new love interest is. Did she not know the basics? But in the movie she Googles cold ones and manages to bring up a website about freezer storage instead. Since then, a fan has actually recreated that freezer website for Twilight devotees. The Alice of the books has a decreased power level. Indeed, she can't see half vampires or shapeshifters in her visions. The reason given is vague, but basically she can't see them because she doesn't know what it's like to be one. This is thrown out in the movies, where she can see everyone, including the half-vampire Renesmee. Will Jacob age? It's a rather confusing question. According the book, Jacob won't age until he becomes able to get control over his phasing into a werewolf. This is probably for the best considering who he ends up with, but all in all it's a weird detail that the movies decided to drop. Stephenie Meyer finished the manuscript for Twilight back in 2003 and it was published 2 years later, but cell phones did exist back then. However, in the book Bella doesn't seem to have one, and she uses a regular home phone instead. The movie changed all that, and Bella uses a cell phone as much as you'd expect her to. There is a little bit of science in Twilight, or scientific words anyway. In Breaking Dawn, Jacob and Carlisle have a talk and conclude that shapeshifters have 24 pairs of chromosomes and vampires have 25. Alas, in the real world that makes no sense, and it was wisely dropped from the movie. In the novel of Breaking Dawn, Alice gets maybe a little too obsessive about planning the wedding of Edward and Bella. Indeed, she even puts a load of sexy underwear in her suitcase. However, in the movie this is reduced to some much more normal pre-wedding chit-chat between Bella and Alice. Meyer kept descriptions of Bella to a minimum. She even said once, on her official website, "I left out a detailed description of Bella in the book so that the reader could more easily step into her shoes." It's hinted at that she's only average looking, and yet boys are constantly falling for her. Edward and Jacob are the obvious ones, but boys from her school want her as well. Meanwhile, the movies got around this by casting the decidedly unaverage Kristen Stewart. The Cullens are rich, and when the whole family gets together for Bella's birthday in the book series, Edward casually mentions that Emmett and Rosalie have just come back from Africa. But whereabouts did they go, and why? And isn't the Sun Continent a bit of a dangerous place for a vampire to go? Indeed, the movie omits that small line. At one point in the Twilight book, Edward and Bella meet and realize they're wearing the same clothes. These are tan sweaters, white-collared shirts and blue jeans, in case you're wondering. It's half sweet and half just plain weird. But in the movie, Edward and Bella don't share that odd little moment. In Eclipse, Jacob begins growing his hair longer because he thinks Bella would like him better that way. Naturally, his fur in his wolf form grows longer too, because, well, why not? In the movies there was no time for the intricacies of wolf fur, and Jacob keeps his hair short, having had it long in the first Twilight. Alice is a popular character in Twilight fandom. But it's worth noting that she does let Edward convince her to kidnap Bella in the book version of Eclipse. He gives her a yellow Porsche in return for depriving Bella of her freedom. But in the movie, Edward and Alice don't commit an action so unsympathetic. Jasper isn't supposed to like Bree. In fact, the minute he sees her in the book, he wants to kill her, and has to be convinced not to. As happened with a lot of unsympathetic actions on the part of the Cullens, this was left out of the movie. Instead, Jasper actually seems to be protecting her in some scenes. Meanwhile, there's even more to the Bella-Jacob relationship in the Book of Eclipse, and not all of it is healthy. At one point, Jacob gets so incensed about Bella and Edward that he accidentally presses his hand on a knife while she's around. Turns out that's fine for him, as werewolves can heal very quickly. Still, the movie chose to omit all that. In the Twilight novels, Alice sometimes comes out with random, vaguely threatening-sounding comments to Bella. In the first book, she tells Edward, "It sounded like you were having Bella for lunch, and we came to see if you would share." And in New Moon, she quips, "I think Bella's having hysterics. Maybe you should slap her. How much is too much?" In the movie of Twilight, Edward tells Bella he's been watching her sleep for just the past couple months. In the books, though, he matter-of-factly tells her he's been visiting her house and watching her almost every night. Oh, and he stole a key to get in through her front door. When Bella does her first hunt as a vampire, she wears a lovely blue dress. Not the most practical, but it makes for some arresting images. In the book there's an even more arresting image. Bella destroys her whole dress while she's off killing animals, so Edward gives her his own shirt. Believe it or not, Bella does actually do things not involving Edward, in the book, anyway. The first Twilight novel finds her writing a school essay about whether the female characters in Shakespeare's Macbeth are written misogynistically. Ironically, Twilight itself has been accused of sexism by some critics. Esme is very motherly, perhaps a little too motherly even. She treats Bella like a beloved daughter right from the moment they meet, because she loves that the former is making her favorite child Edward happy. Bella for her part describes meeting Esme as like meeting a fairy tale, but this is all toned down in the movie. The creatively named Renesmee is supposed to be a supernaturally fast-aging child. In the books, however, she's a mere 2 years old when the series ends. But by the end of the last movie she's considerably older than that, or old enough to be able to make decisions at least. Apparently Edward cares about Bella's education, and maybe a little more than would be normal for a boyfriend. In the Book of Eclipse, Edward gives her some college application forms and she ends up getting accepted into Dartmouth, except Bella had no clue Edward had even sent the letter off. In New Moon, when Alice comes to meet Bella, it's a bit more of a sticky situation than it is in the movie. Indeed, Alice's eyes are black because she's thirsty for blood. In fact, she might have drank Bella's own blood because it smelled so delicious. Who'd be a vampire, eh? Edward beheads Victoria in the movie version of Eclipse, but in the book it goes further. He beheads and dismembers her, in a swift and coolly business-like way. Oh, and to make things just that little bit worse, in the book she tries to run away before he kills her. Obviously Twilight's main audience is young teens, but considering the ages of the characters in it you'd still expect them to use more bad language than they do. This comes off a bit unreal at times. But the movie scriptwriters changed that around, for example turning a jerk to an ass when Jacob apologizes to Bella. And a couple of dirty jokes slid in under the radar too. When it came time to adapt Twilight for the big screen, almost every character was ethnically white. Director Catherine Hardwicke wanted the Cullens to be diverse, but apparently Meyer wouldn't allow it. Nevertheless, eventually she permitted the filmmakers to cast the Kenyan-American Eddie Gathegi in one role. Bella's father Charlie is a pretty popular character, but there's a wince-worthy moment involving him in Eclipse. He hears that Jacob kissed Bella uninvited and got punched by her. Instead of giving Jacob a lecture about the importance of consent, he tells him, "Good for you." Yikes. But it's not in the movie. Here, know about why. See 40 seriously strange details in the Twilight books that did not make it to the movies, and share your thought in comment box. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more related videos.